We are following breaking news from D.C. President Trump announcing that the U.S. has launched airstrikes in Nigeria. This is the post from President Trump on Truth Social just a few minutes ago. He said, "Tonight, at my direction as Commander-in-Chief, the United States launched a powerful and deadly strike against ISIS terrorist scum in northwest Nigeria."
Now, the attacks mark the first by U.S. forces in Nigeria under Trump and comes after the U.S. president warned the West African nation in October and November, saying Christians there faced an existential threat that amounted to genocide and Nigeria's myriad armed conflicts. Now, Reuters report on Monday said that the U.S. had been conducting intelligence gathering flights over the large ports of Nigeria since late November.
Most people think of Christmas as a night of peace, a pause in the world. But on December 25th, 2025, in a quiet corner of northwest Nigeria, Christmas became something else entirely. Long after sunset, explosions echoed near remote communities in Sokoto state, close to the border with Niger. At first, no one knew who was responsible or why. Then a statement came from Washington. The United States had carried out airstrikes inside Nigeria, targeting fighters linked to the Islamic State group. Ordered by President Donald Trump, the attack marked one of the rare times U.S. forces openly struck inside Africa's most populous country. It wasn't part of a declared war. There were no American troops on the ground, just missiles launched from far away and a message sent across continents. What led to this moment? Who was targeted? And how did a Christmas night in Nigeria turn into an American military operation? Let's find out. In the far northwest of Nigeria, Christmas night usually passes quietly. Sokoto State is not a place of bright city lights or loud celebrations. It is a land of open fields, scattered villages, and long, dark roads that fade into the Niger border. On December 25th, 2025, most people had already settled in for the night. Radios were low, phones were charging, the world felt paused. Then the sky changed. Somewhere beyond the villages, a deep, unnatural roar cut through the darkness. Not thunder, not fireworks. It came from above, sharp and fast, followed seconds later by distant explosions. Windows rattled, dogs barked. People stepped outside, staring upward, trying to understand what they were hearing. In places where airstrikes are not part of life, the sound didn't match anything familiar. Messages began moving from phone to phone. "Did you hear that? Something just hit outside town." No one had answers. Nigerian authorities had made no announcement. There were no warnings on the radio, just flashes on the horizon and the echo of impact. For hours, Sokoto sat in uncertainty. Then, far away in the United States, the silence broke. In Washington, while it was still Christmas Day, President Donald Trump posted a statement that instantly turned confusion into global news. He said the U.S. military had carried out airstrikes against Islamic State militants in northwest Nigeria, calling them powerful and deadly. Within minutes, international media picked it up. Shortly after, U.S. Africa Command confirmed the operation, and Nigeria's government acknowledged that the strikes had taken place. What people in Sokoto had heard in the night was not a local clash. It was America. This was no small claim. The United States does not often strike inside Nigeria. This wasn't one of the usual battlefields of the U.S. war on insurgency. Yet here it was, missiles fired into Nigerian territory on Christmas night, targeting fighters. Then came the footage. U.S. sources released a video showing missiles being launched into the dark, rising from military platforms far from African shores. The images were clear. This wasn't a warning shot. This was a real, coordinated attack. By then, one thing was certain. What had begun as strange sounds in a quiet corner of Sokoto had turned into an international military operation, announced from the White House. But one question now dominated everything people wanted to know. Why did the United States choose to strike inside Nigeria? And why on Christmas night? Because, according to Washington, this was no longer just Nigeria's problem. It was America's warning being ignored. When President Donald Trump announced the strikes, he didn't speak in vague military language. He framed it as retaliation. He said militants in Nigeria had been viciously killing innocent people, especially Christians, and that he had already warned them to stop. they didn't. So on Christmas night, he said he ordered the military to act. This was meant to sound simple. Kill civilians and the United States will strike back. But the truth is, the decision had been building for weeks. In the months leading up to Christmas, the Trump administration had become increasingly vocal about violence in northern Nigeria. Officials accused militant groups of carrying out religiously motivated attacks and argued that Abuja was failing to stop them. Then came a serious diplomatic step. The U.S. designated Nigeria a country of particular concern under its religious freedom laws, a label usually reserved for states accused of tolerating or committing severe abuses. After that, Washington imposed visa restrictions on Nigerians, which it said were linked to religious violence. Trump publicly criticized Nigeria and hinted that stronger action could follow. Behind the scenes, intelligence gathering intensified. Surveillance flights increased. Military planners began mapping options. So when Trump spoke on Christmas Day, it wasn't a spontaneous reaction. It was the moment when political pressure turned into military orders. In his message, he said he had warned the militants before. The strikes, he claimed, were the consequence of that warning being ignored. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth echoed the tone, saying U.S. forces were always ready and that more action could follow if needed. The message wasn't only for fighters hiding in Nigeria's forests. It was also for the world. The U.S. was willing to act, even far from its usual battlefields, if it believed civilians were being targeted. But while Trump focused on religion, Nigeria pushed back. Abuja confirmed the strikes, but rejected the idea that this was about defending one group. Nigerian officials said violence in the north kills Muslims and Christians alike, and warned that framing the conflict as purely religious ignored its deeper causes: banditry, poverty, weak security, and the spread of insurgent ideology across borders. Still, the strikes had already happened. From Washington's point of view, the reason was clear: punish groups, deter future attacks, and show strength. Whether that would actually change conditions on the ground in Nigeria was another matter entirely. And that brings up the next critical question. If this was retaliation ordered from the White House, how exactly did the United States carry out such a strike thousands of kilometers away without sending troops into Nigeria? They did it without putting a single American boot on Nigerian soil. The strikes that hit Sokoto state were carried out using long-range cruise missiles, weapons designed to travel hundreds of kilometers and hit precise coordinates deep inland. The Pentagon did not publicly name the exact systems, but the video released afterward showed missiles lifting into the night sky from U.S. military platforms far from Africa's shores, almost certainly naval assets positioned off West Africa. This kind of attack is built for distance. No air bases needed, no troop deployments, just coordinates, satellites, and firepower. Within hours, U.S. Africa Command confirmed that the strikes had targeted militants linked to positions and that multiple militants were killed. They didn't give numbers, they didn't show bodies, just confirmation that the targets were hit. What made this strike different from many U.S. operations elsewhere was what came next. Nigeria confirmed it had helped. Abuja said its security services had shared intelligence with the U.S. and coordinated on targeting. That means the locations weren't chosen blindly. Nigerian forces had identified where the militants were operating, and Washington provided the means to hit them. From a military perspective, it was simple cooperation, local intelligence, global firepower. But from the ground in Sokoto, the effect was terrifying and sudden. One moment, quiet villages. The next, explosions from the sky, fired by a country thousands of kilometers away. And yet, even after the strike, much remained unclear. No official death toll was released. No breakdown of what was destroyed. No confirmation of whether civilians were harmed. AFRICOM said the operation was designed to avoid civilian casualties, but without independent access, no one outside the militaries involved could verify the impact. What was clear is that the U.S. wanted the world to see the message. The released video wasn't accidental. It showed missiles rising into the dark, almost cinematic, proof that America had acted and could act again. But the method of attack only answers part of the story, because missiles don't choose targets on their own. Which leads to the question that matters most for understanding why Sokoto was hit. Who exactly were the fighters hiding in northwest Nigeria, and what made this region important enough for the U.S. to strike? Let's pause for a second to say big thank you to the Black Culture Diary community. where Black voices, stories, and legacies are preserved and amplified. By becoming a member, you're not just supporting the channel, you're becoming part of a powerful cultural movement. Let's continue. They were there because Northwest Nigeria had quietly become a new front. For years, when the world talked about insurgency in Nigeria, it meant one place, the Northeast. Boko Haram, ISWAP, Borno State. That's where cameras went. That's where headlines stayed. But while attention remained fixed there, a different problem was growing in the Northwest, far from the spotlight. Sokoto, Zamfara, and Katsina, these states were once known more for farming and trade than insurgent violence. Their main threat used to be bandit gangs, armed groups kidnapping travelers, raiding villages, and disappearing into forests. Over time, something changed. Some of these criminal networks began to mix with insurgent ideology coming from the Sahel region, filtering in through porous borders with Niger. Out of that chaos, militant-linked cells began to take root. Groups emerged, accused of massacres in rural communities and attacks on civilians. Fighters moved across borders, bringing weapons, money, and ideology. What started as banditry began to look more like organized insurgency, with pledges of loyalty to the Islamic State and connections to wider insurgent networks operating across Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. To people living there, the change was felt before it was named. Attacks became deadlier. Messages are more ideological. Killings are more brutal. Entire villages emptied as families fled. To Washington's intelligence agencies, this looked like a warning sign. Militant groups were opening a new space in Nigeria. Not the well-known Northeast, but the quieter Northwest, closer to Niger, closer to the Sahel, closer to a region already unstable and slipping out of state control. That's why Sokoto mattered. The U.S. believed militants there were not just local criminals, but part of a wider network, capable of linking Nigeria's insecurity to the broader Sahel insurgency. In other words, this wasn't just Nigeria's internal problem anymore. It was becoming part of the global insurgent map. That assessment is what turned forests and villages near Sokoto into targets on American screens. But understanding who the militants were only answers part of the story. Because once foreign missiles strike inside your borders, it creates another, more political question, one that goes beyond militants and into power. So the next question becomes, did Nigeria truly agree to this strike, or was it pressured into accepting foreign firepower on its soil? Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. Yes, Nigeria says it agreed. Within hours of Trump's announcement, Abuja confirmed that the airstrikes were carried out as part of joint counterinsurgency cooperation with the United States. Nigerian officials stressed that the operation was coordinated, that intelligence had been shared, and that the strikes respected Nigeria's sovereignty. This was important. For any state, allowing a foreign power to fire missiles inside its borders is not a small decision. It touches the core of sovereignty, pride, and control. Nigeria wanted it clear to the world. This was not an invasion. It was a partnership. But even as Nigeria confirmed cooperation, it drew a line around the story Washington was telling. While Trump framed the strikes as retaliation for the killing of Christians, Nigerian leaders pushed back. They said insurgent violence in the north kills Muslims and Christians alike and warned against turning a complex insurgency into a religious narrative. For Abuja, the crisis is about security collapse, armed groups, banditry, and cross-border fighting, not just religion. That difference in tone mattered. To Washington, the strike was a moral message. To Abuja, it was a tactical move in a much bigger, messier war. Inside Nigeria, reactions were mixed. Some welcomed the U.S. action, seeing it as long-needed firepower against groups that local forces struggled to defeat. In communities terrorized by militants, any blow against them felt like relief. Others were uneasy. They remembered history, how foreign military involvement in African conflicts often starts small and grows. One strike becomes a pattern. Advice becomes presence. Presence becomes influence. And influence becomes pressure. There was also fear of retaliation. When powerful enemies are hit, they often strike back, not at warships far away, but at villages nearby. People in Sokoto and surrounding areas worried they might now be living on the front line of something much bigger. For Nigeria's military and political leadership, the decision was a trade-off. accept U.S. firepower to hit dangerous targets, but risk deeper foreign involvement and wider consequences. And for the United States, cooperation from Abuja gave legitimacy. It meant the strikes could be framed not as intervention, but as assistance. Still, cooperation doesn't answer the biggest concern. Agreeing to one strike doesn't mean agreeing to an open-ended campaign. Defense officials in Washington hinted that more strikes could follow if militants continue their attacks. That leaves Nigeria facing a question it hasn't fully answered yet. How much U.S. involvement is too much? Which brings the story to its final turning point. If both sides say this was justified, what does this strike actually change, and what might come next for Nigeria and the region? What it changes is simple. A line has been crossed. For the first time in this crisis, the United States has openly used direct military force inside Nigeria. Not advisors, not training missions, not quite intelligence help, but missiles launched from far away on a Nigerian battlefield. That alone shifts everything. Until now, Nigeria's war against insurgents in the north was mainly its own, even when partners helped behind the scenes. Christmas night changed that. It signaled that Washington is now willing to act directly if it believes threats are serious enough. But what follows is still a blank page. The U.S. has not released any confirmed death toll, any breakdown of targets destroyed, any independent assessment of civilian harm, any clear long-term plan. Officials have only said that more strikes are possible if militants continue attacking civilians. That means this could end here, or it could become the opening shot of a new U.S. air campaign in West Africa. For militants hiding in forests and borderlands, the message is obvious. You are now on America's target list. For Nigeria, the consequences are more complicated. On one hand, U.S. firepower could weaken groups that local forces struggle to defeat. It could disrupt networks, kill leaders, and buy time. On the other hand, it risks making Nigeria a regular theater of foreign military action, with all the political and security costs that brings. There is also the danger of escalation. Insurgent groups rarely disappear after one strike. They adapt, they scatter. Sometimes they retaliate, often against the weakest targets, villages, schools, markets. And then there is the regional picture. Northwest Nigeria sits at the edge of the Sahel, a region already torn by insurgencies stretching across Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. If the U.S. expands operations here, it could link Nigeria's crisis more tightly to that wider war, pulling West Africa deeper into global power struggles. What makes this moment unsettling is not just what happened, but how much remains unknown. We still don't know how many were killed, whether any civilians died, which exact weapons were used, or what the next move will be. All we know is that on Christmas night, the sky over Sokoto stopped being only Nigeria's sky. It became part of America's battlefield. And once a place becomes that, history suggests it rarely goes back to being quiet again. So as the dust settles and the echoes fade, the story does not really end here. It opens into a question that will shape what comes next. For Nigeria, for West Africa, and for anyone watching how far America is willing to go in the name of fighting insurgency. Was this a one-time strike meant to send a warning, or the first step into a new, long war in Africa? Let us know in the comments section. Was letting the U.S. make this strike the right decision? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.